The year was sometime around 550 BCE. Yep, BCE. Not the Common Era, CE, BCE. So folks, we're talking about a long, long time ago. At that time, the Hebrew kingdom of Judah had been conquered for more than 40 years. And in 550 BC, a man who has come to be known as the prophet of exile, second Isaiah, began to preach. We find his beginning of preaching, the themes that he preached on and prophesied about in today's reading from chapter, 40? Yep, chapter 40, the very beginning of what we attribute to second Isaiah in the book of, in the collection that we call the book of Isaiah. But he didn't begin that. They had been, by the time he began that, they had been in exile for decades. Only the elite class of people were taken, and by elite, they didn't mean just people that had privilege, and it was their privilege now to go to exile. They meant all the leaders, all the people that had any place, any capabilities, any sway with the people, anybody that could cause some trouble back in the homeland. Over a period of years, they would gather these people up. A bunch of them who were captives when Jerusalem first fell, but then in the succeeding years, they would continue to take people that looked like they might have the ability to cause some trouble and take them back to Babylon, get them out of the way. Get them out of the way. It's estimated that somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 of these people who had an ability to make a difference in the conquered Judah, about 5,000 to 10,000 of them had been taken into exile and then dispersed through Babylon. So it was after they had been there 30 or 40 years that second Isaiah begins to speak and write the message we hear today. In today's story, we find second Isaiah living within a community of exiles in Babylon. We don't know whether he was taken into exile or whether he chose to go there. The point is, he was living within that community and had been for some time. Within Babylon, which was the capital of the Babylonian Empire, he had some sway. See, the Babylonian policy was to exile people like him because they didn't want the trouble I talked about. So all of Judah's leadership was in exile. And the people left behind, there were a lot of them, were in a mess. They were being governed by a Babylonian governor that really didn't care much about them. They were living in absolutely horrible, squalid conditions. And they were the people that really couldn't pull anything together. They didn't have the power to. Some of them maybe even didn't have the physical or mental ability to. And so the people, the remnant left in Judah, were a mess, while the people taken into exile from Judah were the strong ones, the leaders. But they had been there 30 to 40 years or more. Some of those original ones had died out. They're now their families and their descendants, in a large part. The ones who had remembered that first exile were growing old. And the people that had been left behind, well, over those 30 or 40 years, they do what people do when they have to be relocated. They built a life. Some of them had intermarried, and so they had family who were Babylonian, not Jewish. Most of them had decent living situations. They had clothes on their back, food on their table. sometimes even a place in the community, they were doing all right in Babylon. Much better than what they heard about that was left behind in Judah. Meanwhile, in another part of that area, not too far away, but not right next door, the Persian king Cyrus was busy going about establishing a mighty Persian empire. An empire that eventually would become the first ancient superpower. And so the people of Babylon knew this. They knew in 550, as 2nd Isaiah begins to prophesy, they knew what was happening to their neighbors and how the Persian king was gobbling up territory after territory, empire after empire, nation after nation. Among the exiles, they also knew that Cyrus, the king of Persia, had a slightly different policy than had been true in Babylon. Whereas Babylon took all the leadership out, Cyrus simply returned them home. Even gave them money. That's what the people in exile had heard anyway. Even giving them money to go back home and reestablish their communities, their religion. Obviously all under the control of Persia. They were in an occupied place. But it didn't sound like a bad deal. That's the situation. The 2nd Isaiah begins to prophesy. And that's the situation in which the word of the Lord begins to come to him. Now let me make a little footnote about the word of the Lord. Whenever we read the word of the Lord, or anything about the word in the Hebrew Bible, it's obviously written in what language?
Hebrew.
Hebrew, not English. And the Hebrew word that is used there is a word, and I'm probably slaughtering the pronunciation, but it's a word dabar, D-A-B-A-H-R, I think, dabar. And it doesn't exactly mean what we mean when we say word. When we say words, what do we think of?
Words.
Yeah, we think of these, see, we can't even think of it. We think of these kind of things printed on paper that at some point we learned to form concepts within our mind, and kind of an intellectual way of being able to communicate with each other, but also a way, hopefully sometimes, of conveying feelings. But it doesn't mean that in Hebrew. Dabar. The word that's used when it talks about the word of the Lord coming to the prophet. What it means is the creative energy of God. We might today call that spirit, but we would still be a little bit skewed by the meanings we have that go with that. What they meant was much more than the prophet all of a sudden getting a telegram from some distant place. The creative energy of God, when it came to the prophets, entered their hearts and their minds because they allowed it to. They allowed that energy of God, which is always a creative energy. Dabar is the word that's used when they talk about God calling the entirety of creation into being in Genesis. The creative energy of God flowing out from God, working in creation and with creation to continually create, and recreate. That creative energy of God, which is present all around, the prophets allowed to come into themselves. And as that creative energy came into 2nd Isaiah, he began to realize that this just wasn't Cyrus building an empire. It was Cyrus building an empire. But the God who is creative energy was going to use that. to make a way where there seems to be no way. To make a way where there seemed to be no way. Isaiah trusted that. He trusted that he didn't just make that up. He trusted that that really had been the creative energy of God helping him to see what the vision was, and calling him to do something in response, to act. Because see, even though we know that everything that I just talked about actually did come true, it was decades after second Isaiah started writing before that happened. There was a lot of time when it still was a matter of uncertainty, anxiety, and maybe only about another Persian dictator now taking away the community they had made in Babylon. Should they be terrified? Well, how would you feel? Would it help you if I said that we were going to be taken over by this, and this, but you needed to see that really was God making a way? That God was going to use that? Okay? Because see, God uses things that are there. God doesn't necessarily cause them to be, but God can take them and use them in a different way. But would that make sense if you're scared that everything you've built up here? I mean, I didn't come from here. I came from Louisiana. I don't particularly want to go back home to Louisiana now to live. Okay? People in Babylon, not all of them wanted to go back to what was now a ghetto in Judah and start all over. So in that creative energy of God, working in the heart and mind of second Isaiah, what second Isaiah understands is that God first wants him to comfort the people. This isn't a time for a lot of angry rhetoric, God says, you know. Sometimes is a time for that. First Isaiah, that was the time for that. Second Isaiah, in the middle of a crisis, wasn't the time for angry rhetoric. God says, first comfort my people. Speak the truth to them, but speak it gently. Take your time. Be patient with them. Bring them along as you can bring them along so they will be willing to start this unknown way if it comes about. But that's only part of it. The other part that the creative energy of God makes clear in second Isaiah is that second Isaiah needs to energize the people. He needs to convince them that if this happens, they can trust that God will be using it to make a way, that it won't be just them giving themselves over now to the Persians. He needs to begin to work on that and work on helping them to understand that God is going to make a way where there seems to be no way, to not just take them home, but to reestablish a beloved community, the covenant community. That's why God's so interested in this. Can you see what he's doing here? He's trying to say this is more about than just going home now after 50 or 60 years and not even remembering what home looks like and it's a mess. This is about an opportunity. This is an opportunity to establish and be part of establishing the well-being of the world by going back and finally building that community, that beloved community that we were supposed to be working on all this time. This is our second chance. This is our chance to do it. But to do that, second is Isaiah is going to have to remove an awful lot of roadblocks for those people who are now comfortable, satisfied in Babylon, and feeling more threatened about what is happening with Persia. That's what prophets do, though, you know. Prophets aren't fortune tellers. They don't see an already established future that we just haven't seen, because God has given us freedom. The future is never completely predetermined. I mean, God knows all the possibilities for the future. God knows all the potentialities, and if we do this possibility, it's more than likely this is going to happen. If we don't do these possibilities, yeah, it's more than likely these are going to happen. And the prophets, accepting that energy, that creative energy of God in their hearts and minds, are able to see that same truth. They're able to see, you know, if we don't take this opportunity, this is more than likely what's going to happen. This is what our future is going to look like. That's what prophets do. They speak the truth. They speak a twofold truth. They speak a truth about a vision that sometimes is a vision of warning about what's going to happen unless we do these things, and sometimes a vision of hope about what can happen if we do these things. In fact, both of them are usually doing both. The vision is both. If we don't do it, more than likely we're going to end up like this. If we do it, more than likely we're going to be helping God to make the vision that God wants to make, being God's arm. Since we all know that God is actually spirit and doesn't have physical arms. I hope we understand that we are God's arms and legs and mouth. And so that's what the prophet does. Speak the truth about a vision and a call, a vision of what well-being will look like, a call to action. We have many prophets today. Many prophets today. All are pointing to the truth of multiple crises of our times. And they all see some vision and are speaking some vision of what the way needs to look like if a way is to be made out of no way. But see, the truth of all these multiple crises is they're not just singular crises here and there. I mean, we're familiar with the crises of systemic racism on a global basis. But systemic racism will never be solved all by itself, because it's part of a fabric of brokenness that interacts with it, and that it interacts with. And so even though the crises are multiple and interconnected, we can't say, oh, well, I think it's more important to work on this crisis instead of that crisis, so I'm going to forget about all those others, and I'm just going to work on this one. They're all interconnected. It's like if you imagine a woven fabric, and if you start tearing threads, each torn thread puts more stress on the threads that are there, and they begin to tear more, and then their tearing creates other things until before long the whole fabric is just totally ripped apart, right? That's the vision of multiple interconnected crises. And what happens is sometimes this situation seems so overwhelming to us that we feel like a people of exile. We feel like a people not knowing how to live in times in which global crises are happening faster than we can keep up with. And so the temptation is to just say, you know, I'm settled, I'm old, I have enough problems in my life, somebody else is going to have to figure it out. Because we're so overwhelmed. But the truth is that the same creative energy which moved in Isaiah and in the group of people who did decide to go back to Judah, because not all of them did, but there were a few who did decide to go back to Judah. That same creative energy is moving in us. And it's a creative energy that asks us not to fix the whole problem, just to remove the roadblocks we see. Just to remove the boat. We don't have to make the whole thing right. We can't make the whole thing right. All we can do is remove the roadblocks we see. I'm going to give you a visual for that before I close. When Jim and I were on vacation in Bossier, they were doing lots of road construction. And we were trying to get back from a birthday party across the river to the other side of the river where we needed to go and do some other things. And we had gotten across the river, and it looked like things were going pretty well, when all of a sudden, the way we needed to go, there was a train coming by, a roadblock. Jim looks at the train and says, well, it's at least moving. It's going slow, but it's moving. So we sit there for a long time. Then finally, the train stops.
Oh.
And everybody is turning around, trying to go back. I mean, they're almost hitting each other, trying to go around and go back. And we noticed that these cars, they get to a road and they turn right. And we're not from there anymore, so we went to that road, we turned right. And pretty soon there were a whole bunch of cars lined up and stopped because there was this huge roadblock sign. And you know what, they put them on those frames and everything, that this huge roadblock, movable one, but a huge roadblock right in the middle of the road, and everybody had stopped because you couldn't get by it. And then one guy got out of the car. He looked around. He could see that there was a way, though it looked like no way. There was a way. There was rubble over here, rubble over there, but there was a way through to another street. So he simply moved that roadblock enough for everybody to get through. We all went through. We followed that car. It got to another roadblock. He got out. He moved that roadblock so we could get through a little bit. We all went through, and before long, we had found the way through no way. Even though as we were following that along, there was rubble on this side of us, rubble on that side of us, and roadblocks in the way. We weren't called to fix all the rubble. We weren't called to remove every roadblock in Bossier City. The only thing we had to do to find a way was to remove the roadblock, even just a little bit, right in front of us. God is making a way through multiple crises, a way that seems like no way is possible. But God doesn't do it and can't do it single-handedly. We have to be the arms, the legs, the voices. It has been that way since the prophets. It has been that way since God asked Moses to do something and lead the people out. And if the people hadn't been willing to follow, even though God helped make that way, they would never have gotten there. We have free will. We have a choice. We don't have to do it all. We just need to do something. Congressman John Lewis in 2019 tweeted this: "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Do not become bitter or hostile. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Never ever be afraid to make some noise and to get in good trouble, like removing a roadblock. Necessary trouble, if you're going to find a way." And then he ended the tweet with this: "We will find a way to make a way out of no way." And that is the message for this Sunday, second Sunday in Advent 2023, when we think of the creative energy of God and the prophets.
Amen.